Welcome everyone, I'm Laura Hsu. Yesterday I ran a live webinar to cover what's new in the Lightroom world with Lightroom Classic and Lightroom CC, but unfortunately the webinar program crashed 3 times and finally we had to just end the session early. So I'm re-recording the entire session. Now in this webinar I won't be able to cover all of the details on everything that's new. I think I wrote about 9 blog posts and posted 9 videos covering the news, and that would take me much longer than an hour to cover. My goal is really to cover the highlights and to give you context for the news, to hopefully clear up any confusion that you might have so that you leave this session knowing whether you need to make any decisions at this point or not, and how to go about doing that. And also, of course, so you know what to expect if you do install one of these applications. Now, I don't work for Adobe. They don't pay me to advocate for them. I work for you. My bills are paid by your purchases of my video training. I do have a special place in my heart for Adobe though. When I discovered my passion for photography in 2004, I also discovered a passion for Photoshop, and then Lightroom when it came along. I've also worked with the Lightroom team, and I know that they are sincere people trying their best to serve the photographic community. Nevertheless, Adobe is a public company and their goal is therefore to maximize profits. There's nothing wrong with that, but we have to make sure that our needs are met by their products. And at this point for me, that's still the case. Now I'm going to go through a very brief presentation here, and then I'll get into the applications. To summarize the news, Lightroom as we know it has been renamed Lightroom Classic. Technically, it's only the new version that's been released, version 7, that's called Lightroom Classic, but I would encourage you to think of any version you have as Lightroom Classic. This is the program with the library and develop and map and slideshow and print and web modules. I'll get to some thoughts on this name in just a little bit. Now in the past, Lightroom Classic has been available first as a standalone perpetual license. You pay a one-time fee and you own it. And you can use it for as long as your operating system supports it. Alternatively, you could subscribe to the Creative Cloud. The Creative Cloud photography program, which includes Lightroom and Photoshop, has been $9.99 a month since 2013 and is still $9.99 a month. However, Classic version 7 that was just released is only available as part of a Creative Cloud subscription. So we've seen the end of the perpetual versions. If you're a perpetual user, you have a few choices. If you're not yet up to Lightroom 6, you can still purchase the Lightroom 6 perpetual license. It's still on sale and it will be for a while. Now this program was released in mid-2015 and has gotten updates regularly since then, consisting of support for new cameras, new lens profiles, and bug fixes. It will receive 1 or 2 more updates with those types of changes, but as of the end of this year, it will receive no more updates. It will be frozen. If you purchase a camera in 2018 that's released at that point, Lightroom 6 won't be able to read its RAW files. However, you can always download Adobe's free DNG converter to convert those files to Adobe's RAW format, and then Lightroom 6 will read them. If Mac or Windows comes out with an operating system update, and if that breaks Lightroom 6, Adobe's not going to fix that. That said, recent operating system updates haven't broken Lightroom in any serious way, but it is a risk. Alternatively, perpetual users could choose to subscribe to the Creative Cloud or look at competitors. I would be sad to see you leave, but certainly that's an option. Now I'm going to get into prices and packages in more detail later in this session. So Lightroom has been renamed Lightroom Classic. The other big piece of news is that there is a brand new cloud-based Lightroom CC application. So Adobe has taken the Lightroom name and given it to this new application. To me, I think that's going to be very confusing. It already is confusing for everybody. keep in mind from now on that when you go to Google to search for how to do X in Lightroom, that you're potentially going to get results back pertaining to both of the applications. So some of the results will pertain to the Lightroom you're using and some of them won't. And you're going to have to be knowledgeable enough to filter out what's not relevant to you. This is going to become more of a problem as more of us bloggers and instructors put up Lightroom CC articles. When you go to buy a book or a video series, you'll also have to be very careful that it pertains to the version of Lightroom that you have. Now this new application is easier to use, but at this point it's light on features. It's a version 1.0 program. It's easier to use because Lightroom CC does all of the file management for you and catalog management. So those of you that have struggled with missing files and catalog issues, even after watching my video training, in the end may be happier with this application. But I think most Classic users will find that it's too light on features to consider switching right now. And of course, I'm going to show this application to you. Now, what does it mean that the Lightroom name has been given to this new application and taken away from Lightroom Classic? Well, I don't know for sure, but it suggests to me that this new application and solution is the future of Lightroom, and that Lightroom Classic may eventually disappear. But I personally am not worried about that right now. First, Adobe just released a brand new version of Lightroom Classic. That suggests to me that they're still committed to the application and to its user base. Because they don't want to lose all of us Lightroom Classic users, I also believe that they're going to continue to support Lightroom Classic either indefinitely or until Lightroom CC becomes powerful enough to meet the needs of most Lightroom Classic users. So I personally don't feel the need to live in the future and be anxious about it. I still have a Lightroom Classic application that I enjoy using, and I know that Adobe is working on new features for that application. Alright, now this Lightroom CC program is being bundled in your Creative Cloud Photography Program subscription. So you get Lightroom Classic and Lightroom CC as well as Photoshop. Lightroom CC just comes with a small amount of storage, so you can try it out. Again, I'll get back to this in just a little bit. Now, if Lightroom CC is not for you, just ignore it. Continue to use Lightroom Classic, either the version you already have or version 7, and your experience will not change. Everything you've been able to do in Lightroom Classic, you can still do. And that includes syncing collections of photos from Classic to mobile and web, working on your photos on your mobile devices, and having that sync back to Lightroom Classic. So nothing need change for you, except that you have the option to update to the new version 7. Now, there are also updates for Lightroom Mobile for Android devices and iPads and iPhones. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Now, my plan at this point is to go into the Creative Cloud application to clear up a little bit of confusion in there. Then I'm going to go into what's new in Lightroom Classic 7. Then I'll give you a tour of the new Lightroom CC and talk about how it's more than just a desktop application. Then we'll take a look specifically at packages and pricing available for both of these. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about the idea of using Lightroom Classic together with Lightroom CC. Now, before I dive into any of that, I want to go to my website, to laurashu.com, because during this presentation, I'm going to say, for more details on this, read my blog articles. So on laurashu.com, click on blog to go to the blog page, and then click on this What's New button. This page that will come up has links to all of my content related to these releases. So here's an article on what's new in Lightroom Classic 7 that has all of the details and has some video tutorials. Here's a video tutorial on how to upgrade to Lightroom Classic 7, how to migrate from one program to the other, a definitive list of what you can do in Classic that you can't do in CC, etc. So always go to this one page by clicking on this What's New button. Alright, let's take a look at the Creative Cloud application, which is what you install to download your programs that are part of the Creative Cloud subscription that you have. There's been a lot of confusion already about what's listed in here, what to update, and what will happen when you do that. Now, I may have many more apps than you do because I have a subscription to the All App plan. But you should have Photoshop and a couple versions of Lightroom. Here's my Photoshop. I'll scroll down to Lightroom. Lightroom CC is the new cloud-based application that I'm going to show you later in this session. You don't have to download that. That's completely optional. Lightroom Classic CC is version 7 of the Lightroom program that we've been using for the past 10 years. It's only available as part of a Creative Cloud subscription. Many Lightroom 6 Perpetual users who have seen this in their Creative Cloud application have gone ahead and updated it thinking that it must be a free update. Well, in fact, what that would do is give you the trial version of the subscription application. So if you're not interested in a subscription, don't install this. Or if you do, be sure that you cancel it within 7 days if Adobe has your credit card information. Now I want to show you what happens when you click on Update, but it won't happen for me because of a version I already have on my computer. So instead, I'll use Photoshop to show you this. When you click on Update for Lightroom Classic, you'll get this window. If you want this process to uninstall the old version of Lightroom, then you can go ahead and click on Update. But if you want to keep your old version around, for whatever reason, click on Advanced Options and uncheck Remove Old Versions. I definitely would suggest keeping Settings and Preferences, so keep that checked. But if you're not sure that you're going to stick with Classic 7, don't remove the old version. You can install it later at any time. Alright, so that's what I wanted to show you here in the Creative Cloud application. Next, we'll take a look at the new features in Lightroom Classic 7. Now, what Adobe has been working on the hardest for this release is performance improvements. They heard you loud and clear about unacceptable performance in Lightroom 6. You'll find now that the program starts up more quickly. It does that because it's compressing your catalog. The catalog file is smaller now, and with that, they can start the program more quickly. You'll find that Lightroom renders standard and one-to-one previews after import significantly more quickly. This will vary based on your system, but a colleague of mine found a 60+% improvement on building of standard previews and 30+% on building of one-to-one previews. You'll find thumbnails render faster in the grid. Moving from image to image in loop view is faster. Switching from library to develop for the first time after you open the program is faster. Moving from image to image in develop is faster. And then various tasks, deleting collections, importing from another catalog, etc. The full list is in the What's New in Lightroom Classic article on my blog. Now this is the beginning of the performance work from Adobe. They have said that they're going to continue to work on performance improvements. The big new feature in Classic 7 that I'm most excited about is something called Range Mask. This beautiful photo is from Tony Staples. So Tony, thank you very much for lending me this photo. I'm in the Develop module. The adjustment brush, radial filter, and graduated filter allow us to make changes to just parts of our photos. Just brighten the flowers, for example. The new Range Mask feature allows us to further isolate the changes to just a particular range of colors or a particular range of tones. Just the brightest tones, for example. Let's take a look at this in the adjustment brush. By the way, in that What's New in Lightroom Classic 7 article is a video tutorial with all of the details on the Range Mask feature. This is going to be a quick version. I want to work on these flowers. I want to saturate them more and maybe darken them a little bit. First, I'm just going to very quickly brush this area. I'll type O for overlay so you can see where I brushed. And then I'm going to come down to range mask at the bottom here and choose color. I'm going to tell it to just affect the pink areas. I'll type O for overlay to turn that mask off. I'll click on the eyedropper, and then I can click and let go, and Lightroom will sample the color under where I clicked. Or often more effective is to click, hold, and drag to define a larger area. Then I'll hold the Shift key down and click, hold, and drag in a couple other pink areas as well. Next, I'll work with the amount slider. If I hold the Alt key down on PC or the Option key on Mac, I can slide it to the right to expand the range of colors affected, or I can slide it to the left to reduce the range of colors affected. Now, this to me is a beautiful thing. As a Photoshop user used to building a lot of masks, that I can do this so easily and quickly in Lightroom is really fantastic. It really makes me happy. I'll let go of the Alt to the Option key, and I'll come up and, let's see, I'll reduce the highlights and I'll increase saturation. So I've affected just the flowers that quickly. You can also build a luminance range mask. Let's say I want to affect just the sky in this photo. Now I can't use the highlight slider in the basic panel because that will affect other highlights in the photo. I could use the adjustment brush, but let's use the graduated filter this time. I'll click, hold, and drag down here. I'll type O for overlay so you can see what's affected. Everything above where I clicked and dragged. Now I'll come down and choose luminance, which is brightness and darkness. And I've got a range here from pure black to pure white. Whatever's between the two handles will be affected. I want the bright tones, so I'll slide the left handle to the right. If I hold the Alt to the Option key down, I'll see what's being affected. I'll see the mask. Now I've defined it as the brightest tones. Smoothness affects how soft the edge is. If I slide it to the right, you can see that it's so softened that it affects almost everything in that area. If I slide it to the left, though, I get a more defined edge to that mask. If you're not familiar with masks, what's white is fully affected. What's black is not. White is on, black is off. Again, this is a beautiful thing. Now I can go reduce exposure, increase clarity, make whatever changes I want to make to the sky. And then I'll hit the switch on and off at the bottom of the graduated filter. So it's that easy. Watch my range mask video for more ideas on what you can do with this feature. The other big new feature is something called the embedded previews workflow. If after import you go to cull your photos, rate and flag them, and you find that as you move from photo to photo, you're waiting for the preview to load, there's a loading message, and even if that happens with the performance improvements, then you can benefit from this feature. Your camera embeds a JPEG in each of your RAW files. That's what you're seeing on the back of your camera when you shoot a RAW file. You're not looking at the RAW file. So this workflow will fetch and use those JPEGs that are already in your RAW files, and Lightroom will delay building its own previews. Let's take a look at how to do that. I'll click on Import, and normally I would be using a memory card for this, but I happen to have some photos on my desktop that I'll use. You'll set all of your import settings just as you normally do, but under Previews, you'll choose Embedded and Sidecar. And I'll get back to exactly what Sidecar means there. I'll click on Import, and as soon as the photos start appearing in the grid, I can start rating and flagging these photos. And I won't see loading messages as I go from photo to photo. Now those embedded JPEGs use all of your in-camera settings: picture mode, saturation, contrast, sharpening, color space. And those settings are not used on your RAW files. So your embedded previews are going to look different than the previews that Lightroom is ultimately going to generate and the RAW file that you're ultimately going to work on in the Develop module. Because of that, Lightroom is warning us here with this message, and then in the grid with this double arrow symbol, that we're still looking at the embedded previews. To update to have Lightroom use its own, you'll click on this icon and build one or build all. And you may see the images change as you do that. Now your images have always changed. Your raw file has never looked like the JPEGs. It's just that you may not have been aware of that. Now you can go into Preferences and have Lightroom automatically build the previews when it's idle. But again, in my What's New in Lightroom Classic 7 article, I've got a video tutorial that goes through all of the details of this workflow. Another consideration is that some cameras don't embed full-size previews. My Olympus camera does not. So if, as I'm evaluating my photos, I need to zoom in and judge sharpness, using the small embedded preview, which Lightroom is enlarging here, may not be the best way to judge sharpness. You can alternatively shoot in RAW plus JPEG, and Lightroom will use the JPEGs. That's why it says Embedded and Sidecar. It will use the Sidecar JPEG. This means that even if you're importing the RAW files only, Lightroom will use that Sidecar JPEG. So watch the other video tutorial for how to determine whether your previews are full size or not. Those are the big features in Lightroom Classic 7. There are some small things. In the import dialog, you can sort by file type now, so you can easily eliminate your JPEGs, for example. In Smart Collections, you can filter on whether photos have a lens profile applied or have an empty title field, for example. Read my blog article on What's New in Classic 7 for a list of all of the changes. Now, before we move on to the new Lightroom CC program, I want to talk about what you can already do as far as syncing your photos to your mobile devices with Lightroom Classic, assuming you have a Creative Cloud subscription. Lightroom CC is going to build on that, but I want you to know that you can already do a lot. Here in Lightroom Classic, assuming you're logged in, you'd click on the identity plate for that. You can put check marks next to collections to have Lightroom sync those photos up to the cloud, meaning up to Adobe servers or computers, and down to your mobile devices, and down to a particular website. When it does this, it doesn't send your original full-size files up to the cloud and to your mobile devices. It sends smart previews, which are small compressed versions of your files. I've found that they're about 5% of the size in megabytes that my original RAW files are. Let's take a look at Lightroom on my phone. Notice that the icon for Lightroom Mobile is the same as for the Lightroom CC application. I'll get into the thinking behind that more later. The Lightroom Mobile application is available for free from your mobile device app store. Here in Lightroom Mobile, I have all of the collections of photos that I chose to sync from Lightroom Classic. I also have some from Lightroom CC, and I'll get to that, but just pretend for now that they're all from Lightroom Classic. You can view photos from any collection, and then you can edit them using many of the editing tools that we have in Lightroom Classic, including local adjustments. Now, some will find that these are much easier to use on an iPad because it's larger, but you can edit your photos and the work that you do will automatically sync back to Lightroom Classic. You can also rate and flag them. So if I slide up on the left side here, I can assign however many stars I want to. Sliding up on the right side, I can assign a pick flag or down to reject a photo. I can view information about the photos, and I can type in titles and captions, and then I can share photos to the camera roll, to other applications, to Facebook, etc. So that's the good news. You can already do a lot with Lightroom Classic and a Creative Cloud subscription. Now there are new releases for Lightroom Mobile for iOS and Android that you can get from your App Store that also allow you to keyword photos. So I can add the keyword water, for example. Here's the bad news about that though. keywording that you do in Lightroom Mobile will not sync to Lightroom Classic. This is a new feature, and Adobe has decided that for new features going forward, they will not build any more syncing to Lightroom Classic. Keywords will only sync to the new cloud-based Lightroom CC application. In these new releases, you can also add albums to folders, album folders, just like collection sets. Those also will not sync to Lightroom Classic. So Classic users really should not use keywording or folders on your mobile devices, or you'll be very disappointed when that work doesn't sync to Lightroom Classic. Now, I'm not happy about this. We've been asking for keywording on our mobile devices since day one of Lightroom Mobile. So to only get this in the cloud-based Lightroom CC that is not powerful enough for most of us Classic users is not satisfactory to many of us. Now, if this is the case for you, I would encourage you to give Adobe feedback. Ask them to reconsider this decision. Your feedback is going to be critical from this day forward, not only on this feature, but generally on Lightroom Classic and what you would need to see in the cloud-based Lightroom CC in order to consider it. All right, so you've seen that you can work on your mobile devices in Lightroom Classic. I also want to very briefly show you Lightroom Web at lightroom.adobe.com. Once you're logged in here, you will also see all of your collections that you synced from Lightroom Classic. And again, you can work on them here in a web browser, and you can share them from here. You can also import photos either into your mobile device or into Lightroom Web, and those original files will sync back to Lightroom Classic and Lightroom CC. So there's a lot of powerful features that we already have. Given that, let's take a look at the new Lightroom CC application. I'll get to the big picture on this, but first let's take a look at the easy-to-use part of this. Let's add some new photos to it. I'll click on the plus, and normally it would show me a memory card if I had one plugged in, but I don't, so I'll import a folder off of my desktop. This is the import dialog. All we can do is uncheck photos that we don't want to import and optionally add them to an album, which is just like a collection in Lightroom Classic. And then you'd click on Add. So some users will be happy that the import dialog doesn't have all of those complicated options that Lightroom Classic has. Other users will of course miss all of those features. I'll add. Now, Lightroom CC will make a copy of these photos on your hard drive, and then it will start syncing them all up to the cloud. Unlike Lightroom Classic, which just sends small compressed versions of your files to the cloud, Lightroom CC sends the full-size original files, your original RAW or JPEG files. So all of your files are automatically backed up to the cloud. Now this is wonderful if you have a reasonably fast internet connection and your internet usage is not being metered. If you have a really slow and sporadic internet connection or really tight limits on how much you can upload and download, then this program is probably not for you, at least at this point. I'm hoping that at some point in the future we have the option to just upload the smaller Spark previews, and also the option to sync from our computer to our mobile devices using our home networks rather than using the internet. But those aren't options at this point. Now we can access photos that we've imported. From recently added shortcuts, we can drill down by date, and then we can set up and access photos with albums. But there's no folders panel here. And that's because Lightroom CC does all of the file management for you. This is a hands-off application, which again, some will find a great relief and others will find unsatisfactory. But Lightroom CC copies your files into its own folder structure in a packaged library in your Pictures folder, and it decides what it keeps on your hard drive and what it stores just in the cloud. There are some preferences in here that allow you to control a little bit. Lightroom CC will use up to 25% of my available disk space on my internal hard drive, and anything past that will only be stored in the cloud. It's pretty smart about which files it stores locally versus in the cloud, things you've worked on recently, imported recently, etc. Now you can choose to store a copy of all of your files locally. If you don't completely trust Adobe's backup system in the cloud, storing them locally will allow you to back them up yourself using your backup programs that back up to other hard drives and to other cloud services. And this is a better option if you're not getting good response time for downloading with your internet service. But you'll need hard drive space for all of these copies. These are separate copies from what Lightroom Classic has. So if you're using both, you would have 2 copies of each file. I'll cancel out of this. Before I get into the other tasks you can do in Lightroom CC, I want to talk about the big picture. Because Lightroom CC is not just a desktop application. Lightroom CC refers to a larger ecosystem that consists of the desktop application, which, by the way, you can have on 2 computers, and Lightroom CC will automatically keep them both up to date. So files and work that you do on one computer will automatically download to your other computer. So this is the multi-computer workflow that photographers have been asking for. It's not really a multi-user workflow unless you log in with the same ID, and then you risk running into conflicts if you're both working on the same photo. But anyway, Lightroom CC consists of the desktop application and then also Lightroom Mobile, which is called Lightroom CC for iOS and Android, and Lightroom Web that I showed you. You'll notice that the mobile applications and the web application are using the Lightroom CC logo because they're all part of this ecosystem. Files can be imported into any one of these access points. They'll sync up to the cloud and then down to every other access point. Work you do in any one of them automatically syncs to the other ones. This differs from Lightroom Classic sync capabilities in that it's uploading all of your original files automatically. You're not choosing which collections to upload. They're the original files, not smart previews, and they're fully integrated. Any work you do in one of them will sync to the others. Keywording in mobile, for example, will sync to Lightroom CC Desktop. It wouldn't sync to Lightroom Classic. I personally am really excited about the future of this. To be able to have all my photos with me everywhere and to be able to work on them regardless of where I am is exciting to me. I know, though, that some photographers will not want all of their photos uploaded to the cloud. If you have 8 terabytes, you're going to find out later in this presentation that it would be very expensive to have a Lightroom CC plan to upload all of that. And regardless of cost, you may not want all of your not-so-great photos going to your mobile devices in the web. And again, you might not have the internet service to support this. I'm still really excited to see where it goes. Now let's talk about what you can do in Lightroom CC right now, other than access your photos. First, you can view information about them. It's a limited amount of metadata or information. You can type in some information, you can view some other, not nearly as much as in Lightroom Classic. You can keyword your photos. Keywords are flat in the Lightroom CC world. Hierarchical keywords are not supported in Lightroom CC, desktop, mobile, or web. You can edit your photos. Most of Lightroom Classic's edit tools are here, and the ones that are not here, which include the tone curve, split toning, camera profiles, and red eye and pet eye, will be coming. Some of the sliders and tools are arranged differently, but they work the same. If you hover over the names of them, you get a nice little explanation of what they do. And you'll find that these 3 dots give you a few other options. Now, while you have most of the direct editing tools, you can't work on multiple photos at once right now in Lightroom CC. And you can't sync your work from one photo to many photos as you can in Classic. You can copy from one photo to another single photo, but it will copy all of your global settings and none of your local settings. And you don't have a choice on selecting just a subset of those, for example, to just copy the white balance from one photo to another, for example. You can send photos to Photoshop from here, but not Photoshop Elements or other editors. As far as exporting, I'll click on Save To. Note that this is not saving your work. Lightroom CC automatically saves your work, just like Lightroom Classic does. This means export. You can export JPEGs or original files. Let's take a look at JPEGs. You can export a JPEG of any size, but quality is fixed at 80, color space is fixed at sRGB. That's fine for a lot of uses, but it's not nearly as much control as we need. Otherwise, you can also export your original file type with the settings saved to XMP. I'm not going to get into what that is at this point, but you can't save PSDs and TIFFs, for example. You can't watermark your photos while you do this. Now, on my resource page on my blog, you'll find an article titled The Definitive List of What You Can Do in Lightroom Classic Compared to CC that will list every single feature. If you're considering switching to Lightroom CC, I would highly encourage you to read through that list to make sure you're not giving up something that's important to you. Now, one thing that's unique to Lightroom CC, that's also in Lightroom CC for mobile and web, is search. Let me type G to go back to grid view, and I'll search my entire catalog here. And I'm going to search for dogs. Now, I have not keyworded these photos with dogs. What Lightroom CC has done is analyze the content of these images to identify dogs and bring me back those photos. Now, it's based on artificial intelligence and machine learning, and it's done on Adobe servers. So the sync to the cloud has to have completed, and you have to have an internet connection for this to work. Often you'll see false positives. I'll see a few photos that don't have dogs, and if I manually look through my catalog, I'd probably find some dogs that weren't identified. So it's not perfect, but it's still very handy. You can also do rule-based filters that will have no false positives or negatives. You can show just your photos with a certain number of stars, a particular flag, photo versus video, particular keywords, cameras, and locations. By the way, Lightroom CC supports videos in that you can import them and view them here, but you can't edit them all in Lightroom CC. You'd need Classic for that or some other program. So that's pretty much what you can do in Lightroom CC at this point. Again, the advantages of this cloud-based approach are that everything is backed up automatically to the cloud. Everything is available on mobile and web and a second computer, and all of your work syncs back to the other access points. And then finally, you have access to the computing power of Adobe servers. Right now just for search, but if you went on to Lightroom Web, you could also explore a technology preview of a best photo function that automatically curates your catalog to identify best photos. That also requires that connection to Adobe servers. Now, you don't have to be on the internet all the time to use this program. I should have said that earlier. I apologize. You can import photos, keyword them, flag them, rate them, and edit them without having an internet connection. You won't be able to search, and if your camera assigned GPS information to photos, I don't think this one has it, you would see that if you had an internet connection, Lightroom CC would go up to Google and populate city, state, and country. You won't have access to that if you don't have an internet connection. But you can work in the program quite easily without that internet connection. You won't get the backup to the cloud, you won't get the syncing to mobile devices, and you won't get the search and the reverse geocoding. Now, if this program is for you and you want to migrate your Lightroom Classic catalog of photos and work over to Lightroom CC, in Lightroom CC you're going to use the File Migrate Lightroom Catalog process. However, there is some prep work that I recommend you doing over here in Lightroom Classic first, Because Lightroom CC does not use your folder structure, it creates its own copies of your files and puts them in a folder structure that you never see. If your folder structure in Lightroom Classic is meaningful to you, for example, if you have descriptions on all of your folders, or maybe you've rearranged all your photos into subject folders, then you'll want to translate this folder structure into collections. So I would set up a Windows on Earth collection for these photos, and I would nest these collections in up to 4 levels of collection sets before I did that migration. Let's talk about what else will and will not migrate. Smart collections won't migrate. There are no rule-based collections in Lightroom CC. So if any of these that you've created are meaningful to you, you want to create manual collections that correspond to them so that you'll have access to them in Lightroom CC. They won't get updated from now on because there are no smart collections over there, but at least you'd have the initial groupings. Keywords will carry over, but they will be flattened. I would get my photo merge keyword and my shoe Fab 6 practice photos keyword, but one wouldn't be nested in the other. Stars and flags will carry over, but color labels will not. Or actually, color labels will be converted to keywords. So this photo would get a keyword of red during the migration. Now your editing will carry over, and I think that's it. Anyway, bottom line, I recommend that you watch my video on my blog on how to migrate your catalog from Lightroom Classic to Lightroom CC. It also talks about how to migrate just a part of your catalog, so that you go through all of the prep work necessary to make sure you don't lose useful work you've done in Lightroom Classic. Another thing you'll need to do is connect your missing files and folders, and I talk about that in that video. So go to my resource page, look for the article and video on how to migrate. Alright, let's go back to the presentation here for a minute. And now that you've seen Lightroom CC, let's talk about the pricing plans. The Creative Cloud Photography program has been around for years now. Now you get Lightroom Classic and Photoshop as before, but you get Lightroom CC, the new cloud-based program, with 20 gigabytes of storage. Now, you know how big your raw files are. Maybe they're 20 megabytes, 40 megabytes. This is not much storage, but it will allow you to play around with Lightroom CC to see whether it's for you or not. So these three together are still $9.99 a month with that limited storage. If you decide Lightroom CC is for you and you want to put all or most of your photos in there, you'll need to upgrade to more storage. Generally speaking, it'll cost you $10 per terabyte. So you can get 1 terabyte of storage for $19.99 a month with these three programs. But if you're currently a subscriber, they'll give you a $5 discount each month for the first year. So you'll go from $9.99 a month to $14.99 a month to be able to use CC with a terabyte of storage. That's only for the first year though, so expect after a year that it would go up to $19.99 a month. Beyond 1 terabyte, you can get 2, 5, or 10. And it's $10 per additional. So if you have 5 terabytes, you'll pay $50 plus the $10, it'd be $60 a month. If you have 6 terabytes, you'd have to buy 10 terabytes, $100 plus the $9.99 a month, $110 a month. So it is very expensive if you have a lot of photos. And of course, it will take a while for all of those photos to sync up to the cloud and down to your mobile devices. Alternatively, if you only need the new cloud-based Lightroom CC, you can just subscribe to that for $9.99 a month with 1 terabyte or $10 a month per terabyte with these limitations. So it definitely can get expensive if you have a lot of photos. And if you ideally only want some of those in the cloud, then paying to have all of them in the cloud will get frustrating. You'll have to decide whether it's worth it for you. Now, I would just encourage you, whether on this or any of the news, if you have feedback for Adobe, this is the time to give it. All of this is brand new, and I'm really optimistic that Adobe is going to incorporate the feedback they get in further development of these solutions. All right, now the last thing I wanted to talk about was just to mention very briefly, and that is, what if you want to work with both programs? But I want to just revisit for a second, what if you just want to try out Lightroom CC? What I recommend is that in Lightroom Classic, you turn off syncing. Click on the identity plate and pause syncing so that there's no conversation between the two as you go try out Lightroom CC. Then you can migrate a portion of your catalog over, or you could just go straight into Lightroom CC and import some photos and play. I think that's the easiest route. Just import some photos and play. Lightroom CC makes its own copy of the photos, so when you're done playing, you could delete them from here, and you could uninstall the application if it's not for you. If instead you leave syncing on, if you migrate your catalog over to Lightroom CC and you're using Lightroom Classic 2015, you'll find that you can't turn syncing back on. You would have to upgrade to Classic 7 to be able to turn syncing back on. So what if you think you want to work with both programs together? The cleanest scenario for me would be if I'm traveling, I might use Lightroom CC to import photos, work on them, and if I happen to have a good internet connection in the hotel, let them sync up to the cloud. And then when I get home, I would open up Lightroom Classic, and with sync turned on, I would find that all of my photos and all of the work would automatically come into my Lightroom Classic catalog. So that really is a wonderful thing, and those are original files, your full-size files that would come into Classic. It would be a second copy of them, but that would be an easy way to get your travel work into your main catalog without having to go through the Lightroom Classic, export from the laptop catalog, and import into this catalog. So if you don't like that process, that export and import, using Lightroom CC could be an option. In that case, after I got everything into my Classic catalog, I would delete the versions that are sitting in Lightroom CC. It would only be my travel solution. Now what if instead you're thinking, well, I want to actually have all my photos in both. I've got more powerful features in Classic, but Lightroom CC gets my original files up to the cloud. So you're trying to get the best of both worlds. Well, I have to say that it gets complicated, and I'm not going to get into all the details. You can do it, but it's really meant for people who can handle the complexity of it. First, your files will be duplicated. You'll have your Classic copy, and then if you're storing your Lightroom CC files on your computer instead of just in the cloud, you'll have your Lightroom CC copy. Some of the work you do in one program won't sync to the other. Adding keywords in Lightroom CC won't sync to Classic. Adding keywords in Classic won't sync to CC. Editing will. So you have to keep track of what work you can do that will sync back and forth and what work is just stuck in one program. There are other things that don't work in both directions. For example, your synced collections in Lightroom Classic, if you delete photos from them, it will remove them from Lightroom CC. In other words, it will delete that Lightroom CC version, but deleting the version in Lightroom CC doesn't delete the version in Classic. So it gets very confusing and it gets dangerous, because if you mix up where you can delete and where you can't delete, you're headed for trouble. Lightroom Classic only syncs smart previews, so if you accidentally import into Lightroom Classic instead of CC, you've only got smart previews in the cloud instead of originals. Lightroom Classic can't sync files over 200 megabytes. Lightroom CC can. So you really have to have your wits about you to use both programs together without ending up with issues. Now, I'm hoping to write a blog post sometime soon on this, but there may already be others out there by other authors, so I would recommend looking for that. All right, so that's what I plan to cover today. I'm going to leave it at this. I'm afraid this has already gone on way too long. But just in summary, Lightroom as we know it is now called Lightroom Classic, and there is a version 7 out there in the Creative Cloud app that you can download with the performance improvements, range mask, and embedded previews. We have the new cloud-based Lightroom CC program, and then we have improvements in Lightroom Mobile and Web. By the way, read my article on what's new in Lightroom iOS 3.0 and Android 3.1, I think, for more details. There are also other new features available over there. But again, keep in mind that nothing needs to change for you. We still have a great Lightroom Classic program here to use. Assuming you're on a Creative Cloud subscription, you can get the new features and continue working as before. We'll see what the future holds, but I think that the future is bright. We're just going to have to go through kind of a rocky period right now with confusion and also with getting our input into Adobe to influence how these products are developed. I hope you've enjoyed this session. I'm Laura Shue.